We are now reaching our final discussion of this conference. I want to thank all of you for sticking with us. It has been a really rich couple of days covering a lot of topics, everything from domestic issues in Georgia to Europe to NATO, the wider region here, Russia policy, US foreign policy. It has really covered the gamut. And I can't think of a better way to wrap up the discussions than to bring onto the stage yet another head of state from Europe who's responsible for this wide panoply of issues and can maybe give us some perspective as she is dealing with them. Let me, are we ready? Yes, let me invite to the stage now the President of Estonia, Madam Kertsi Kaljulaid. Thank you so much for being with us, Madam President. Please have a seat. And your ears must have been burning earlier today because I was using Estonia as a good example. And what I was recalling was the situation in the 1990s when people in Europe and even the United States were saying it is impossible to consider that Estonia or any of the Baltic states could be a member of the EU, could be a member of NATO. And what Estonia did was radically transform, and very quickly, so that when we came to the point of enlarging NATO again after Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, it became impossible to consider adding other countries to NATO if we didn't take Estonia and the Baltic states because you were the best performers. So that is an example of some of the success that Estonia achieved in the 90s, early 2000s that was very significant. And from that perspective, I'm very interested to hear you talk about your understanding of Georgia, your advice to the Georgian people. How do you see Georgia in its trajectory and what should they be doing?
Thank you for your kind words about my own country. And indeed, in Estonia, when we regained our independence, we had nothing. I mean, the economy had totally collapsed, and we were considered indeed by some with our EU and NATO ambition as a nuisance. And therefore we decided to forget about these states and will you accept us or will you not accept us. We told our people that we need democracy, rule of law, because this will be good not only for our self-esteem and for our people's ability to speak out, but it will also bring economic growth. And we did it instinctively right, probably because we were trying to do everything differently than what the Soviet Union had done. And of course, this memory was then, at that point, extremely fresh. But the lesson here for everybody is you are doing it for yourself. You are not doing it because otherwise some club is not going to accept you. You are not doing it because you hope that then they will give you the accession date or some more money or whatever. You have to get this done with your own people, with your own objectives for your own country. And of course, when people started to notice that there is transformation, just like now people are really starting to notice that there is a clear reform path and transformation in Georgia. There have been governmental changes with reclaiming all the time that we stay the EU course, we stay the NATO course, we are Western Georgia. This has been extremely similar to what we sensed at the point. People started to notice. And then comes this discussion of enlargement for us. And also here, we hear discussion all the time. And similarly to the situation today, it was then the same. Yes, enlargement is considered, but not in your case. And we had a slogan, you have to be better than Poland. It doesn't necessarily mean that we wanted to be specifically better than Poland, but we wanted to be better than anybody else who was being considered, because we realized that that is our only chance to be accepted to these clubs. So that's why we always strive to demonstrate to our own people and also to the outside. But the thing here is, you cannot do one without the other. It cannot be that internally you haven't maybe changed so much, meaning that if your civil society or journalists are still continuously asking the questions, is our media free? Is our political system pluralistic enough? Then this resonates also elsewhere, and your message is not clean and clear and loud enough to be heard. Even if your political elite strives very much to present their willingness to be exactly like the countries in Europe. And I'm not telling they are not doing the reform. It's just that you also have to be transparent enough inside the country so that the people believe it and start speaking in unison, because only this way the concert will be loud enough to be ignored.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You have been president for a relatively short period of time, but you have had quite an impact as a European head of state. You've certainly cut a figure across the continent. Georgia is in the midst of a presidential election. A few months from now, there will be a new president sitting in office here. It will be under a new set of powers for the president, less executive power than the current president has had, similar to the situation you have as president of Estonia with the prime minister. What advice do you have for the new president? What would you say should be on the 100-day agenda for that new head of state in Georgia?
I think it is a loud and open declaration that he or she will be the president for all people, for all interest groups, for all NGOs, for all parts of civil society, for all political groups, so that you will be able to unite your people to support the objectives, which should be actually the objectives which you see from President's office and which is much harder to see from Prime Minister's office, and it's where you want to be in 30 years' time. This is actually what I'm also still doing in Estonia. I'm thinking in 30 years' term, because I don't have to gather the vote. Well, next year, 2 years after, I don't carry also executive responsibility, similarly like here in Georgia. So uniting your people behind a single goal of becoming a functional democracy and a rule of law country, shining star of the region. I think that should be the objective of any president in this country.
Thank you. Like Georgia, indeed. Like Georgia, Estonia is, of course, a frontline state with a very large and occasionally rumbling neighbor that may threaten Estonia. So far, Estonia is, of course, a member of NATO with NATO forces on its territory, air policing mission, which may grow to become an air defense mission someday. Georgia doesn't have some of those advantages, but it has some of the same similarities. You have been also very forthright in addressing the challenges of Russia's aggression in this region. I really can't thank you enough for going to the line of the ceasefire in Ukraine and seeing firsthand the humanitarian suffering of the population there, inflicted directly by the intervention of Russia in Ukraine. When you travel, first off, when you are now a member of the EU, you're meeting with your EU counterparts in Brussels and elsewhere. What kind of reception do you get, and what kind of understanding do you get from other EU heads of state about this Russia phenomenon? They must respect you as a frontline state. They're also, you see different policies, from many countries in Europe. What are those conversations like with Western Europe or even some Central European countries about the challenge with Russia?
Actually, I have to say that I do not speak behind the closed doors much differently than what I do speak in these forums, which I have visited over the course of the last 2 years. It's quite clear that Russia wants to change our international rules-based world order. It is looking at every crack, where there is a crack or even where there isn't a crack. For example, I believe that the Salisbury attack was a test on whether there is a crack between the rest of the Europe and Great Britain after the Brexit vote. There wasn't. This was a miscalculation. So everywhere there is a crack, they try to use this crack, be it offering economic opportunities or outright threat, what we have seen in Georgia and also in Ukraine. And in a way, they have use this idea of martial arts, that if you do not have your own strength, use the strength of the others, making it go in your vector. And this has been the strength of President Putin, I believe, very much so. Every time we declare that, yes, we do, we are open to Georgia's plans and we are open to Ukrainian plans and we welcome Maidan and all these, he holds us to the mirror and says, are you really standing by your word? And then every time we kind of balk and we do not offer clear perspectives, clear words enough. And this way, every time a little bit of our unity is chipped away. And why I say it comes from the point of where Russia realizes it doesn't have so many strengths. Economically, it's a weak country. It's a country which is in demographic decline and economic decline. So the time is short to turn the tables on us. It has to turn the tables quickly. It has to try every opportunity to find the way. It's not like some growing economic might which can try to, buy the world off with their money and then wait patiently. The solution has to be quick to their problem, and their problem is the rules-based world architecture, not interest-based world architecture. And every time we accept that, yes, we are not able to stand by our words. We are not able to, end the occupation, partial occupation of Georgia. We are not able to implement Minsk agreements. And we start to waver and say, we cannot stay this way. We need to go back to business as usual. Every time a little bit of a rules-based world is chipped away. And this is exactly what I talk to everybody, openly, publicly, on the record, off the record.
And what do they say?
I think it's not nice to say, but I think there is quite a bit of a logic in what I'm saying. And it's difficult to say that I'm mistaken.
Thank you. And so I'm assuming that part of that logic is that, and I'll actually quote President Trump here, does it make a lot of sense for us to spend money on defense of Europe and Europe to give that money to Russia for gas? And then particularly thinking about Nord Stream 2. Does that seem to follow the logic of standing up for a rules-based order?
This is exactly a project where we are worried that economic interest tends to prevail over the long-term interest of standing up for our values. I think it is not a problem only for Ukraine, whereas indeed they risk losing the transit money, but frankly speaking, thinking also that the gas supplies are getting diversified, I'm not sure you should count on transit money for 30 years to come, because there are LNG, there are green technologies. It might be best to kind of write off this grid and use it as long as you can. So this for me is not economically so relevant. On the other hand, we have agreed in Europe on something which we call energy union. And the energy union calls for diversification of the sources. So Nord Stream 2 definitely is in conflict with the energy union principle as well. So naturally, we feel a little bit let down that our partners are not following the principles we ourselves agreed.
You were also, for many years, very high level in the European Commission. What about competition policy? Where does Nord Stream 2 fit in EU competition policy?
Actually, I was in the European Court of Auditors, so I was auditing the European Commissions and particularly its use of the EU budget. My job was actually to go to the European Parliament and say, dear Commissioner, once again, 11th year, 12th year in a row, you have not managed to spend the money that well. So it's quite far from the competition policy. But indeed, you can sense and you can feel that if there is, in one country or in Europe in general, there is a dominance of one producer, one supplier, then that is a problem and an issue. Definitely, Europe has done some, energy choices. It does, I think, much better work than, for example, in some other rich economies governments are doing in trying to limit the CO2 emissions, and gas is cleaner than coal, etc. But some harsh decisions about shutting down nuclear, not building new nuclear capacity, means that there is a certain reliance on gas. And I understand that there is a short-term problem which needs fixing. But on the other hand, it might be better actually to not to lose your geopolitical focus while you are fixing a short-term energy problem.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and I would like to come to the audience for questions, so please be considering what you'd like to ask. I want to ask a question about hybrid warfare. Russia has demonstrated a great deal of agility in using a variety of tools to apply pressure and to confuse and distract and to influence politics in the West and in Europe in many, many ways. Disinformation, cyber attacks, intelligence operations, energy deals, bribery, legitimate business deals, political party financing, in addition to the little green man and what we saw in Crimea and in the Donbass. Estonia has weathered all this pretty well, it seems to me. What are some of the things you've learned, or that Estonia has learned, in facing this kind of hybrid pressure from Russia, and what would you give as advice to a country like Georgia?
First of all, I would like to say that sometimes I have a feeling that we only expect that the next trouble comes from hybrid. Let's not forget that conventional has not come away. We have a compounded issue now. So in some technology developments, new risks kill the old risks automatically. Here, clearly, this is not going to happen. So we still need to pay attention on the conventional protection, and NATO's umbrella needs to mean actually, well, boots and technology and all this. Coming now to the question of hybrid risks, I think here in Georgia it's very evident to people that we are not very good advisors to Western Europe because we are so used to reading between the lines in the newspapers of the Soviet Union. So we are used to it. We never take anything at the face value if we know this is not coming from free media. And this is something which, well, Western countries have found more difficult to learn. It's also for us evident that if there is a government-financed TV program, then you check and double-check before you believe anything what is on. It's not so understood for the Western democracies. But what we can see now is that also thanks to the great work of, well, democracies, parliaments, in also United States, this is now exposing the whole picture. And I think there is nothing better what we can do is than to expose the picture and then stand up and attribute and attribute and attribute. The first strong act in Western European countries against this hybrid risk was President Macron standing in front of Elysee beside President Putin and saying, "You meddled with my election campaign, I didn't like it." That was the first element, and we have been actually building on that. We shouldn't be shy. If we are sure we are right, and we know we are right, there is no free media in Russia. Lots of Russian government-funded TV programs, etc., tried to create trouble. Also, we find in Baltic states sometimes there are networks exposed on how exactly Russian influence works. We have to talk to our people about it. There is no other way. Just keep talking.
Transparency. Thank you. Okay, I see one hand in the audience. Could we get a microphone toward the center here? And woman in the brown hair, please bring the microphone forward if we can. Thank you. Microphone to the center aisle, please. Thank you. And please introduce yourself, if you would.
Madam President, my name is Dovilė Šukytė, Eastern Europe Studies Center, Lithuania. Thank you for interesting remarks. I would like to ask you about relations with Belarus. You shared your advice for upcoming president of Georgia, and it's always easier to advise and engage with the frontrunners of Eastern Partnership. Belarus is another case, more different case, closer relations, even integration with Russia in certain areas. So, as you said, you think about the future. What is Estonian approach in relations with Belarus bilaterally, and how do you see EU cooperation with Belarus now? Thank you.
Eastern Partnership of the European Union is a tool of European Union to project its values. Europe wants to have good economic relations, also political relations with all its neighbors, and therefore it has set up different layers of tools, starting from very grassroots and going up towards the political levels. And actually, the tools which are currently available for different Eastern Partnership countries are different. In some cases, we use more grassroots, trying to open up for civil society the possibilities to learn and see what exactly is this European way of living, what exactly does it mean, our value space. And this is exactly what I see as our level of cooperation right now. When Estonia was the EU Council presidency, we did a high number of discussion forums and conferences in Tallinn for Eastern Partnership, civil society, Eastern Partnership businesses, SMEs, everything. We try to support societies and economies of Eastern partners, and we support their ambition if their ambition is to, well, be able to make independent decisions in this world as they want to do them. We respect every country's own will.
Another in the audience in the front row here. And again, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It's Ketevan Chachava. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Development and Democracy, Georgian NGO. And at the same time, I'm a steering committee member of the World Movement for Democracy. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this amazing opportunity, the PRC and McCain Institute, because in Georgia we are very welcoming people, but we do not really have that much pleasure to host such an amazing guest. Well, first of all, let me catch up on, Madam President, on your very friendly recommendation about Georgia. For example, that we need to be better than the other runners for the membership when it comes to NATO or EU. Where do you see us at this point? You have been very honest, and I would really like to hear that very honestly. And also, what do you see concretely what we can do to maybe be the ones who are the best runners? Thank you.
Actually, if we look for the opportunities EU has given Georgia also through the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, and part of this is also the invitation to reform, for example, to environmental, justice, internal security, all these spheres to do continuous reform. And right now, I have to say, European Union, well, is measuring this with the tape they have, and they have some worries. So I would suggest that in addition to taking your small steps towards joining different EU bodies, institutions, having memorandums of understanding, that also this homework needs to be stepped up. But also, and I'm now borrowing from something what John McCain told me. John McCain was the one who came to Estonia and went directly to a Russian officer who was responsible for the Paldiski nuclear base in Estonia. And he told that guy to get out. And probably his words would not have been practically endorsed or in any way endorsed by many careful political movers and thinkers. But what John taught me with this story and numerous other occasions is, if you think you are right, I mean, don't be afraid to stand up, even if you are the only one who is at this point standing up and saying it. And therefore, I think, don't be afraid also to stand up and say, this is our objective and this is what we want to achieve. And even if we know that the window of opportunity may open tomorrow or in 10 years' time, we are not giving up, we are never giving up. And nobody, even Europe itself, cannot take the right from Georgian people to dream of the European Union.
Here, here. As a former ambassador to NATO and being part of that enlargement process over about 15 years, the other thing I would say in answer to your question is, if you know or if you think that you are cutting corners, everybody else knows too. Another question from the audience? Yes, in the back left over here. And please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, Madam President. I am Temurikoshvili from South Caucasian Initiative, ISI. I have a question about Estonia's technology development in the last years. We know that Georgia and Estonia is not rich for mineral or natural resources, and our most good side and strong side is to invest in technology development. So my question is, how do we see in the future on technology influence and technology roles on good governance, and what should do Georgia for rising on the modern as a technology state, that Estonia is leader in Baltic states, so Georgia wants to leader in the South Caucasian states. So my point is on technology now. Thanks.
I have to disappoint you. Estonia has never created, invented anything fancy in technology. What it does, it's a quick follower. And being a quick follower comes from the ability to create permissive legal space for technology use. People create laws and the legal space, and then technology can be used. It never happens vice versa. Technology does not bring you transparency. It's only people and the legal space. And our experience is that also for the technology use, what the government has to do is to create the opportunities, make sure that this sphere is regulated. In Estonia, actually, the digital sphere with digital signature and security is much more regulated than elsewhere. It's not wild west of digital development. And this has made it secure to play in Estonian sandbox for numerous technologies. Important here is we create legal space, private sector does the rest, and this is how we intend also it to be for autonomous, automated, artificial intelligence systems in the future. We are now discussing, and I think you could do so as well, how to regulate the relation between an algorithm and a human being in a technology-neutral way. And we also want to bring this technology discussion into the United Nations Security Council to make sure also our international law space is permissive for new technology, at the same time safe to use.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What a great answer. Rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. A final question from the audience. May I call on someone from the audience? John Teft, can I invite you to take a microphone? Madam President, John Teft was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, to Ukraine, to Georgia, and to Lithuania, and probably has a perspective on this region unmatched by anyone. John?
This is always intimidating when he does this. Madam President, he sets me up for it. I would just say it's an honor for all of us, and here sitting in the second row, we've all been saying how impressed we are with your answers and your presentation. Congratulations. As you can imagine, having left Moscow about a year ago and giving lots of speeches, I still get asked the fundamental question. When Putin leaves, and we don't know when, what do you think will happen in Russia? And you have a special interest, obviously, being right on the border.
Yes, but I think we should not be obsessed with when Putin leaves, what happens to Russia. We should do what we can do, and this is engagement with Russian civil society. Exactly the same. As I said, we have the levels at which we can work. In Russia, we can work very much on grassroots level. For example, Estonia is accepting students from St. Petersburg area and elsewhere into Estonia. Again, to make sure that people cannot be fooled by any political games, that they know what there is to offer if you look at what the Western democracies have achieved economically for the happiness of their people. Because if you ask any Estonian what has been the biggest single event, what changed their well-being and their living quality, then this was the moment when we got to be free. You could speak out, you were not punished for thinking and speaking your thoughts, you could travel freely outside of the country, you could well undertake something entrepreneurial and be reaping the gains and given the ownership. And this is fundamentally lacking in Russia, which doesn't mean that their people don't pine for it. So I think we should trust Russian civil society also in that occasion, because that is all we can do, is prepare this civil society we have to trust.
Terrific. Well, Madam President, it has been said that a great country is a country that produces great people. And so I think you have shown to all of us that Estonia is a great country because it has produced a great president. So thank you for being with us. Join me in thanking Madam President.
Thank you all.